Hi, I'm Galen Wade. This would be episode 2 of my Shelley and Mary project unfolding. It's hashtag Merry Monday for me, although I've been writing into this all week and I can definitely start to feel something emerging in a fresh way. Although, as I've said in the last episode, this is a project I've been pursuing for almost 30 years now. And so I'm writing every day, but I'm also kind of picking my windows to start revisiting some of my research. So I have some things in that respect that I'll share. I'm not going to read all my writing. I'm going to try and I'm writing with pen and paper into this notebook here, and I'm really happy with how that's going, although I keep running out of ink and different pens. I was loving writing with this one, but it ran out. And you could have worse problems as a writer, I suppose. And so, one of the things I had thought when I did this last time, which was last Monday, was I meant to share. A lot of things start coming to me as I get this rolling. So one of the things I think that's really important, well, first of all, Mary will always refer to Percy Shelley, as do most of his friends. He will sign his name P.B. Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley. I think that's how you say it. Um, but everyone calls him Shelley, and it's apt. It's a fitting name for who he is. There's a shine to it, I think, maybe, and a beauty, and something of the sea and the shore, and these all kind of connect up as themes in his life as well. So. There's that. There's the fact that Shelley would always have a book in his hand. He would, if he was reading the ancients, apparently he would kind of marinate in it for months at a time. But when his body was found by Trelawney, he had a copy of a book by Aeschylus, I think is how you say it, the Greek playwright, and a book by Keats, which I have written down in that. So anyway, last time I did this, as I said, there was a thing I meant to do, was read a couple of poems from this book of translations that I have, that I always forget has some pretty valuable info in it. I've almost gotten rid of this thing 3 or 4 times, and then I'm like, wait a minute. And so I had intended to read a couple of translations because I was thinking that would be a part of the language, for example, of an evening with Shelley and Byron would be them discussing their writers, and they were active translators. They read Greek and Latin, and Shelley, this is a thing that I've kind of noted, is that Shelley's affinity for the classics was so strong, it was like present for him. And when I first kind of discovered Shelley's works for myself, I felt a kind of similar feeling, like somehow time had just kind of leaped out, and I could understand this work of his as if it were, written for me yesterday. And I think he felt the same way about some of the classic writers, especially Plato was one he hovered around and translated frequently. So, I found this little book. It's called The World's Best Poems. It's not a little book, it's a big book. But it has a couple of little poems that I had noted. But it's funny, I looked in this book and I realized that it was purchased, it has my initials, and the date I bought it, which was 1284. And I bought it in Hammond, Louisiana. And when I saw that, I remembered the bookstore. I remember the day I went into it and found this book. And kind of coincidentally, I got to tell this story to my father, who is currently kind of stuck in Hammond, Louisiana, because they went there for my mom's a high school reunion, and a couple of days after that, her left eye she kind of lost vision in that eye, and they've been unable to travel and are waiting for it to get better, and so they're kind of stuck in Hammond right now. And this book just jumped in my hand, and there it is, Hammond, Louisiana. So I'm going to read a couple of translations. They're brief. The first one is actually Sappho, and as translated by Lord Byron, which I thought was kind of, um, given his sort of hedonist reputation, I thought was very interesting. Fragments. Hesperus the bringer. O Hesperus, thou bringest all good things home to the weary, to the hungry cheer. To the young bird, the parent's brooding wings, the welcome stall to the overlabored steer. Whatever of peace about our hearthstone clings, wherever our household gods protect of dear, whatever our household gods protect of dear, are gathered round us by thy look of rest. Thou bringest the child to its mother's breast. And then also interestingly, there's a translation from Shelley of a Plato poem that is also about the evening star or Hesperus, called The Morning and Evening Star. Thou wert the morning star among the living, ere thy fair light had fled. Now, having died, thou art as Hesperus, giving new splendor to the dead. So there's a couple of translations into English by Shelley and Byron. And so thinking about them also, they were writing by hand into manuscripts and reading. So there's books, but there's also an exchange of letters that happens all through whatever network of thing I establish, all through their times. They were writing letters to each other, to friends, to family. And one of there's two books that I have here that are perhaps, that I've kind of started with, that are perhaps my favorite, one of which is a selection of Shelley's letters. This was published, I think, in 1880 something. And it's selected by Richard Garnett, who is one of my favorite of the Shelley scholars I discovered over time. And I like his vibe, I like his introduction, and there's some kind of amazing things in the letter. I still haven't found the letter that I'm looking for, which is where he describes a dream in which he meets his own doppelganger, which is kind of cool. But what I did find was a letter to his friend Thomas Peacock, describing their time in Italy. I think it's written from Naples, but he describes a visit to Pompeii that's absolutely stunning in its clarity. And it's like he describes the ruins and this kind of world encased in fine sand and coated and destroyed. And then somehow he sees into it and brings it all back to life, which is kind of incredible. And the beautiful literary feat. So these things are happening in his letters all the time. And he remarks on the fact that he's not keeping a diary. So this is in some ways his attempt to capture a bit. And he's always, he's like, I couldn't begin to describe, and then he begins to describe. So, but one line really, really struck me in this one letter. So this letter to Peacock happens, let's see, where does it start? Oh, this is a kind of waste of time. Sorry. Boy, this is a long one. I think it was written 22 December 1818. So a few years before he died. And I guess they're in Italy for quite a while. But there's this description of a thing. He's talking, and then he describes how... he describes how he's finished the first act of Prometheus, which is Prometheus Unbound. He said, my first act of Prometheus is complete, and I think you would like it. I certainly do. But he's talking to his friend Peacock here. And then he makes a kind of curious comment. I consider poetry very subordinate to moral and political silence. And if I were well, certainly I would aspire to the latter. And then this is what struck me so deeply. For I can conceive a great work embodying the discoveries of all ages and harmonizing the contending creeds by which mankind have been ruled. So this is kind of an amazing statement. And later in the letter, he goes on to describe how Pompeii and these cities were built to harmonize with nature, that there's lots of open spaces, and that your structures and your government buildings and everything's designed to be sort of seen in context and be a part of nature. I don't know, it's just a kind of beautiful idea, and I'll probably make some scans of a few excerpts from the letter, and whenever I get to typing this all up, this will certainly be, this letter in particular will be a piece of something that I go for. And just to bridge this, I'll give you a little taste of how my writing is sort of starting to evolve. There's another letter that happens early in the book, I think it's the second of the selected letters, that I noticed was written on November 11th, 1811. So 1111 is important to me personally as my own date of birth. And I realized that that letter would have in fact have been written on 11/11/11. I got to experience one of those myself, so coming up on 13 years ago. So it's just a thing that struck me, and it's a letter about love. And so it kind of started me thinking about Harriet, who was Shelley's first wife, and his first couple of letters describe a little bit how he kind of fell into that relationship. Harriet was a friend of his sister's. They were at school together, a place called Mrs. Fenning's, I believe. And so I started kind of riffing on that, and I was like, and what of Harriet? Well, she was my sister's friend at Miss Fenning's school. Shall we really speak of her here? By all means, if you would be truly free. Well, what if I could in all things be unbridled? What if I could gather you all here and speak my truth, my whole truth, with complete honesty? Would the beast in me, the monster, not repel you? I've tried again and again, but then I am always drawn back to beauty, like leaves in the cyclone of an autumn wind. Harriet was my friend, not my sister's. She was our friend. Her adulation gave me a taste for a thing I had no idea I desired. It was easy to marry that idea, sadly, to my persistent regret. Harriet is my soul ignored, the longing for love, for fame, for infamy at any cost. Perhaps it is too close to my heart, her ghost in every drop of water, the cost of my present happiness and misery, every dropper full. Excuse me, that was out of line. There can be no excuse for me. The misery, the rain, the rain. Do you see, Mary, the pain? Your easy love, a balm to soothe, and yet inflame. I can picture these words on the page before I ever set pen to paper, which is why this is the only way this will ever be written. By my will. I am William, of yore, of present and future, and this is my gift, to see and remove myself entirely and get out of the way of that which wishes to be, to bloom upon me. I will carry the weight and blink briefly into eternity, right now, and it will come down, it will rain, and we will play games and go insane. And it will be all right and wrong. A dropper full, it will change my mind. And even the next day, I will be full of rapture and rupture and dreaming. Right, we were to speak of Harriet, the trap. Do you see how gifted I am at avoiding? Ah, yes, you see it all the time, in the hand you love that rises cup to lips to drink the draught of forgetfulness. Is this bliss? No, it is to wake beside you, but then to realize you have snuck out of the bed and are drinking tea with my doppelganger. All right, so that's some of my writing, which there will be more of to share when I start inputting it into the computer, which I've yet to done, and I intend to start publishing waves of this through Substack, but wanted to get started here with another of these little movies. And I'm going to conclude with a description I found. This is the other great book in my collection, Records of Shelley and Byron by Twelawny, who is present and is the one who identified Shelley's body when he was found, washed up on the shore after a boat accident, which I forgot may have had some deliberation behind it. There's some speculation. But Trelawney, in the preface to this book, so page X111, in the preface here, he has a kind of incredible description of Shelley that I think will kind of guide my vision of him, and it's quite sweet. There was a marked individuality in Shelley, in habits, manners, and all the ordinary occurrences of life. He never changed. He took no notice of what other people did, brave, frank, and outspoken, like a well-conditioned boy, well-bred and considerate for others, because he was totally devoid of selfishness and vanity. He did not laugh or even smile. He was always earnest. He had observed that people laughed at the misadventure of others and therefore thought it cruel. But his eyes and face were so expressive that you could see all the workings within his mind, in joy or sorrow. And pretty amazing description. And then also in this book, Trelawney has, in the appendix, there's some pretty incredible description of the burning of Shelley's body. It was at sea for 8 days, I think. And when Trelawney identified him, most of the body that was exposed had been devoured by sea creatures. I think kettlefish maybe was one of the... but anyway, just this image of both Shelley and William's body being kind of devoured by sea creatures and washed up on the shore. And really it was through his dress that he was able to make a definitive kind of identification. And maybe we'll get to that another time. But it is said that Lamia and Isabel by Keats was the last thing that Shelley was reading when he was kind of washed out to sea. There was definitely a storm that happened. Let's see. Well, let's read a little bit of this description. Mr. Shelley had been reading the poems of Lamia and Isabel by Keats as the volume was found turned back open in his pocket. So sudden was the squall. The fragments, being now collected and placed in the furnace, were fired, and the flames ascended to the height of the lofty pines near us. We again gathered round and repeated, as far as we could remember, the ancient rites and ceremonies used on similar occasions. Lord B wished to have preserved the skull, which was strikingly beautiful in its form. It was small and very thin, and fell to pieces on attempting to remove it. Notwithstanding the enormous fire, we had ample time, ere it was consumed, to contemplate the singular beauty and romantic wildness of the scenery and objects around us. So Byron, Trelawney, and basically Italian officials are the ones present at the cremation of Shelley's body on the shore. And I guess Mary and the Williams widow were at a house in Leghorn where they were staying. Piecing together the facts, putting together some story, letting it breathe through me, enjoying this process, and I will continue to do this. I think it may end up wanting to be a book before it becomes anything else, but we'll see. But I am thankful that this project has brought me back to a place of writing into a notebook with pen and paper. Feels absolutely wonderful to me right now. So I'm going to continue to do this and say that this is a product of WadeWorks Incorporated. Copyright 2024, and all rights reserved, I guess, as I kind of put this together and start piecing together my research and letting words kind of flow through me. I will say end transmission number 2, Shelley and Mary.